We're shooting for par, and Atari Archive's look at golf. It's been over a year, but Atari has returned to the world of sports with the company's take on plain old windmill-free golf. You may recall that the company had published a version of miniature golf in March of 1979, based on an unreleased arcade game. Well, golf is substantially different in just about every aspect, and feels like a better realized, more functional game all around. Just not one that necessarily moves the video golf genre forward a whole lot. While I'm not going to get into the details of the sport itself, modern golf dates back to 1500s Scotland and involves golfers using a variety of wood and iron clubs to hit a small ball across a course and into a small cup. Every shot adds a point to the score. The goal is to have the lowest score possible at the end of the game. Due to the sport's focus on course building, wind direction, the force and angle of a swing, physics, and contending with terrain and obstacles, it makes for an interesting challenge to translate to the digital realm. Certainly, there have been many attempts over the decades, some absolute masterpieces, and some a bit more rudimentary. The earliest golf games I've found were written for DEC's PDP computers in 1970. The first is a straight golf program, while the second has you playing caddy to famed golfer Arnold Palmer, choosing his clubs for him. Both of these programs use ASCII characters to display the course and appear quite sophisticated for their time. Unsurprisingly, a text-based version appears in David Dahl's 101 Basic Computer Games book published in 1973, where you type in the strength of your swing and what club you're using. But the next big step forward for digital versions of the game came along in 1979, as Magnavox released Computer Golf for the Odyssey2. This take really defines, mechanically speaking, how a golf game could be done on a home console to the extent that, as we'll see, Atari's game is substantially similar. Your golfer can trudge around each course, their club always pointing to the ball. Pushing the button will cause them to begin a clockwise wind-up. The longer you hold it, the more powerful the shot. Though if you hold it too long, it becomes uncontrolled and will move a random distance. The ball's angle is determined by the angle of the golfer, and once you make it to the green, the game changes angle to an up-close shot, allowing you to putt it in. It's a surprisingly elegant piece of game design given how little there was to go on before it, and while each course is little more than a different arrangement of trees and fairway, it's still pretty fun. The game even features your golfer throwing a little temper tantrum when they hit a tree. Knock it into the rough outside the fairway and the ball stops, forcing you to knock it back in. Sam Overton's game was praised as an innovative and groundbreaking game in the pages of Electronic Games magazine, even winning one of their arcade awards for Best Solitary Game. With this degree of admiration, it's unsurprising that Computer Golf would become the initial template for future games in the genre. While there has been some confusion over authorship of Atari's Golf, according to his LinkedIn page, Michael Lorenzen is the person who developed it. This was the first game of Lorenzen's we'll be seeing. He also was behind the VCS games Circus Atari, which we'll be looking at soon, and the Activision game Oink, in addition to doing work on the Atari computer line. I wasn't able to get a hold of Lorenzen to talk about his career in games, and I wasn't able to turn up any standalone interviews with him either. It's distinctly possible that it's a period of his career that he's just moved past. But while that's unfortunate, he did manage to put together a solid title here that plays similarly to Magnavox's title, but with its own little improvements on how that game does things. Much like Computer Golf, you have the same overhead perspective and the same mechanics for the angle and power to your swings. The game even zooms in on the green when your ball makes it there, just as in the Odyssey2 game. Lorenzen added in more obstacles to his version, however. Sand traps and water hazards appear here, allowing for more complex course design. Knock the ball into a sand trap, and not only is it difficult to see, but your shots will not send it far at all. Knock it into a water hazard, and your score is penalized, with 2 points being added to your swing instead of 1. The difficulty switches adjust what happens if the ball is knocked off the fairway into the rough. On the B difficulty, the ball simply stops, and that's that. On A, the ball will enter the rough and become invisible, requiring the golfer to try and find it based on where the club is facing, while getting very little distance off each shot. It's a nice little wrinkle to try and keep things competitive, though once you get the hang of your shots, it isn't too difficult to keep the ball on the fairway. You get 9 holes in this course and an option for 2 players. At the top of the screen, the game shows your scores, the hole number, and each hole's par, or target number of swings. And that's Atari's Golf. It's a small evolution over Magnavox's game, but it plays well. The mechanics seen in this cartridge don't directly translate to any future golf games, but as the second ever home console golfing game, it's arguable that it didn't need to reinvent the wheel too much to be worth a look. It just had to bring the solid gameplay of Magnavox's take to the far more popular VCS platform. Unfortunately, Atari would not have the last word on golf games among its cohort of game consoles, as only a few months later, Mattel's Intellivision would bring a big step forward in the evolution of the golf genre. The Intellivision would actually be the home of two different golf games, but the first, PGA Golf, would begin hitting stores in November 1980. Like Mattel's previously seen sports games NFL football and Major League Baseball, PGA Golf aims for complexity and realism over producing a simple, arcade-style game. In this case, players are allowed to select their clubs, a return to form from the earlier computer versions of golf, with each number on the keypad assigned to a different club. The Intellivision disc is used to select your shooting angle in one of its 16 directions. The side buttons are split up into long, medium, and short distances. To shoot, you push one of them to begin your swing, and then push it again to determine the angle of your shot. The closer to the bottom of the swing you are, the straighter the shot will be. Pushing the button early makes you hook the shot to the left, while pushing late will cause it to slice right. Pushing nothing will produce a random angle. The game features 9 holes with the full set of golfing obstacles: water hazards, sand traps, trees, rough patches, and the green itself. While not nearly as straightforward to play as the Atari and Magnavox games, Mattel's game is still easy enough to play that even a non-golfing enthusiast can have a good time. Mattel seemed to see it as a major step ahead of Atari's Golf, making it a major focus of its 1981 advertising. Mattel struggled with the Intellivision as it started its slow rollout across US markets in March 1980 until its national debut in August, during which advertising focused on the ill-fated keyboard add-on. Internal market research suggested that most consumers weren't actually interested in the machine as a computer platform, leading Mattel to zero in on what would be its defining advertising angle for their game machine for the Christmas season: head-to-head comparisons of their football and baseball titles to market leader Atari's. It was a massive success, allowing Mattel to sell through the 190,000 Intellivision units they produced that year, and taking 20% of the console market by dollar volume. The company's head-to-head ad campaign continued through 1981, with PGA Golf being its own focal point. While one could argue that Atari's football and home run carts simply offered a different play experience than Mattel's attempts at realism, Golf has no such claim against PGA Golf. The latter simply does most everything better. Atari's game still has the zoom in on the green, which makes putting far more interesting and intuitive, but beyond that, PGA Golf simply felt like a next-generation game compared to Atari's. PGA Golf was itself surpassed by its follow-up, Chipshot, Super Pro Golf. Chipshot was developed from the ground up in the system's twilight years before being published in 1987 by INTV Corporation, and was something of a labor of love by designer Steve Ettinger. Ettinger was an avid golfer at the time, which is why when developer Real Time Associates received an assignment to spruce up the original Mattel Golf game with some new features, an approach taken by INTV for several other sports games, he instead offered to create an entirely new game from the ground up, with a slew of modern features. The most prominent change is that this version utilizes a defined swing gauge, a mechanic popularized with Nintendo's 1984 golf game for the Famicom, that debuted in the West the following year. The original PGA Golf swing system was sort of a half-step towards the swing gauge, but Chipshot fully embraces what was, by 1987, a standard feature in golfing video games. Chipshot also features 5 full 18-hole courses, with 99 holes to choose from to build out a custom course. Mechanically, it includes a wind factor that golfers have to be mindful of, inclines on the green, and practice modes for both general driving and putting. This is easily one of the finest video golfing experiences on a game system of the Intellivision's vintage. More broadly, it's one of the best of its day when it came out. The press seems to agree with that assessment. The Computer Entertainer newsletter gave it a glowing review in its August 1987 edition, Chipshot's 4 stars even surpassed the 3.5 stars given to The Legend of Zelda in the same issue. And it goes without saying that the Bally Professional Arcade had its share of golf games written, published, and sold by its enthusiast base, using the various versions of BASIC the system had. The earliest was published in Cursor magazine in July 1980, right around the time Atari's golf cart was coming out, and took the unusual step of including BASIC code to calibrate the controller knob, which was used to control the angle of your swings. The idea here was that you'd mark on the controller where the center point is on the knob, and keep that in mind when making your shots. Honestly, it's a pretty good take on the game, combining aspects of the graphical version seen on consoles to that point, with the club selection and numerical force entry of the text-based computer versions. It even includes wind as a factor for your shots. Another golf game was written by Bob Hensel and published by The Arcadian in February 1981, and is actually far less intuitive than the one written by Mike Meslowski, having you choose your angle from a preordained set and providing very poor visual cues as to what, exactly, is your target. This version would be revisited by Ken Lill, as program development within the enthusiast community was rather iterative and communal, with members taking code and modifying it to either create something new or improve an existing program. In this case, Lill used the Blue RAM memory expansion for the Bally to produce a much more sophisticated take on the game, with a mobile golfer, a ball that goes above the ground, and even a special hole-in-one visual that Lill tells me no one he's aware of has ever actually achieved. Certainly, I haven't. There was a final golf game seemingly programmed later in the decade on the platform called Pro Golf, another Blue RAM version that brings in the now familiar double-tap power bar seen in Nintendo's Golf. There's a bit of a mystery around how this game was distributed. The tape that the version online stems from came from a fellow named Dave Carson, but he never told anyone how he heard about it and got a copy in the first place. By 1988, no professional arcade newsletters were still running, though fans who had met through the platform did tend to keep in touch. Carson was also known for being a BBS regular, who reportedly could find anything through them, so it is likely that he knew author Henry Sopko in some capacity and got the game that way. In any event, Carson passed it to Mike White, a Bally fan who was behind the BASIC carts. These were essentially basic programs that booted up from cartridges instead of cassette tapes. He produced a single BASIC cart of Pro Golf and sold it to Ken Lill, who in turn has included the game on his Bally multicarts since. Both of these memory-expanded games play quite well, and are all the more impressive given the platform's age and the limitations of the basic languages that they work around. White suggested that all of these games were built in some part over their predecessors going all the way back to Maslowski's title, which may be a reason why there is such a through line of design improvements. Atari, on the other hand, never revisited this sport past Lorenzen's take on it on the VCS. The company sold just under 9,000 copies of the game in 1987 and 88, the biggest years for the VCS during the Atari Corporation era, but never published an updated version to supplant it as they did with sports like basketball or baseball. This is something of a shame, as updated golf games on the Intellivision and the professional arcade showed that there were new tricks one could eke out of limited hardware designed in the late 1970s. But for 1980, golf is a perfectly fine conversion of the sport. It doesn't do a whole lot to build on the foundation laid down in Magnavox's release the year before, and it is effectively surpassed by Mattel's game a few months down the line. But even if it doesn't do anything new, it's not too far above par. Next time, we drive recklessly down a poorly lit road.